Hi, welcome. I'm Charlotte Loesch with Premium Screenplay, and today I'm chatting with Zach Cox, a literary manager at Circle Management and Productions. Zach, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I love these kinds of events.
Oh, good. Well, we love you, so we're off to a great start. Before we get
Thank you.
into sort of talking about your career and all the technical stuff, I wanted to ask, what have you been watching?
Yeah, it's a great question. My wife and I, we love to watch funny things. It's a nice
Yeah.
change of pace from a lot of what I develop, which is, serious, whether it be features or TV.
Mhm.
So we watch a lot of Letterkenny. Um,
Love.
yeah, it's a
Yes.
lot of fun. The rapid fire dialogue is amazing. It's a ton
Oh
of
my
fun.
God. I have to watch
But
it with
of
subtitles
course,
on.
oh yeah, no. Sometimes we'll go back and turn the subtitles on. It's yeah,
Yeah.
because they have a certain slang and a certain style that it's sometimes very
Yeah,
hard to pick up on. But love
exactly.
Letterkenny, What We Do in the Shadows, Loot on
Mhm.
Apple with Maya Rudolph, who we love. And then on
Love.
the hour long stuff, of course, we do watch hour longs. House of the Dragon recently. Wife's very excited about the next season of Lord of the Rings. So yeah, lots of
Mm,
stuff. Lots of
perfect.
stuff.
Those are all, I'm putting all of those back on my list. Rewatches are necessary. I love Letterkenny, but
Absolutely.
it's one of those shows that you can't look away because I feel like I look away for 5 seconds and I turn back and I have no idea what's happening at all.
Without a doubt.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
no,
keeps my
they're
brain
so
sharp.
quick and witty. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the repartee is so rapid fire. If you look away, you will get lost.
it's so impressive. And I always wonder how much is like written into the script versus how much they just like improv on the day of because I'm
It's a
sure they're
great
so
question.
smart that half of it is come up on the spot.
I'm sure. Yeah, and I mean the main character is one of the co-creators, so I'm sure he's improving all the
Oh
time. So yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's excellent.
Perfect. Those are all good watches. Um
Yes.
to sort of get into it, you are a literary manager and we'll talk
Yes.
more about the specifics of that later, but just to start
Yep.
off, is being a literary manager something that you always were aware of, something that you always wanted to do? Or if not, what was the moment where you found out about it and you realized, okay, this is where my passion is?
It's a great question. For me, so I moved to Los Angeles in 2006, went to a small state school in Northern California called Chico State. I didn't really know anybody, didn't know the industry. I thought at the time I wanted to be a writer. Many of us in this industry came out here to be writers, whether you're a producer now, agent, manager,
Uh-huh.
whatever. That is the most common story you will hear. I was fortunate in that when I got an internship at Circle, maybe a month and a half after I moved out here, it was the best thing ever because the education I got being at a management and production company simultaneously was invaluable. And so I learned what it was like to be on the producing side because there were two overhead producers I was working for, great mentors of mine. And then the managers, I would kind of, eavesdrop and see what they were doing. And, and what I noticed, so I noticed two major things, one about myself and one an observation of the industry, right? So what I noticed was I wasn't doing what a lot of the young aspiring writers were doing. And all I mean by that is they would wake up at 5 in the morning and write for 3 hours and then go do their day job, right? Whether they were a barista or a server or worked in retail, whatever the case may be, they were very regimented. I set aside these 3 to 4 hours a day, and then I go make a living so I can stay, so I can live.
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, and it was really eye opening for me because when I had moved out here, I thought, oh, I'm good at this because I won some awards in college and some professors had said, hey, you're a good writer, whatever.
Mhm.
I wasn't doing it because I loved it. And I think if you're going to be an artist in this business, you have to love being an artist because it's hard. You're going to have good years, bad years, everything in between. And you don't know where your next meal is coming from sometimes. And it might take 6 months, it might take a year. It's not a steady income. It's not a steady pace. And I also felt like a lot of times the writers, by nature of being the artist and then having representation, they didn't have a lot of control right, of their
Mhm.
lives. And that I don't think of myself as a control freak, but that freaked me out. That like I would have no control, I'd just be totally reliant on somebody else,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think more so when it comes to my career, I have that. And then the second thing I noticed was managers work with the same clients over and over, and producers, not saying there's no repeat business in that side of things, but there's less of it, right? So you might work with a writer once, maybe twice, maybe three times, but it's not a career long thing. And I
Mhm.
thought for myself, I'm so picky that if I find somebody I love, I want to work with
Uh-huh.
them always.
Yeah,
I don't want to just do one-offs and then move
yeah,
on.
yeah. You want to hold
So
on to
that
that.
yeah, so that was sort of my path. It was me coming to the realization I wasn't a writer, plus being at that, like, do I want to go for the development path or do I want to go for the representation path? And so I
Yeah.
went
Okay,
towards
wow.
representation.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I can see how being in that environment and being exposed to like a lot of different
Yeah.
areas would be super beneficial, especially when you're young and you don't really know exactly
Don't know what
where
you
you,
don't know.
where you want to end up. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's great. That's perfect. Um, you mentioned that you wanted to be a writer. Um,
Yes.
I know for me personally, I'm a writer as well, and one of the things
Yeah.
that sort of like ignited my passion for writing was watching old Saturday Night Live clips on like
Sure.
my dad's computer and like sneaking down late at night and watching like Band Down by the River and like Dana Carvey and
Yeah.
a bunch of those videos.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering for you,
Yeah.
what was your sort of earliest creative inspirations and influences?
Nobody ever asked that. That's such a good question. I mean, so my earliest memories, like in life, like in the world, there's two. There's watching the 49ers with my dad. I'm a big 49er fan. And the second one is watching my dad and his best friend watched a lot of cinema, a lot of horror actually. Like so
Oh,
the first movie I remember seeing, I'm sure there were others, but that I recall
yeah.
vividly was Night of the Living Dead, the original black and white. And
So
I
good.
wasn't yeah, and it's such a good film, right? But I certainly at like 3 years old, was 4 years old, whatever, was not picking up on the
Yeah.
social commentary that was being
Hmm.
made in that film. But I just remember how special those moments were, sitting there with my dad and his best friend. And so, my dad worked in music, which I say which is important insofar as like when it came to art in our
Hmm.
house, there weren't a lot of restrictions. Like maybe here and there, if it was,
Hmm.
depending on your age and if it was way out there. But like whether it was comic books, whether it was novels, whether it was movies, whether it was, paintings, whatever, what music, there was no, it was like, oh, you're interested in that? Explore it and see what
Yeah.
that
Oh,
sparks for
that's
you.
beautiful.
So even being from like a small town where like half the people don't get out. I mean, I'm not even saying they want to get out, but like they just stay in the hometown, right? For
Hmm.
me, it was always, and I talk about this with my friends who are from the same town, like my childhood friends. I had a dad who made the arts seem like that's a thing that you could work in, even though he was,
Yeah.
he's just an indie buyer for the parent company of Tower Records. It still
Yeah.
was like, oh, he works in music. So of course
Yeah.
I could work in movies. Why couldn't I work in movies? Whereas most people I think where I'm from would just be like, it's the family farm business,
Hmm.
which is half the
Hmm.
town, right? That I don't know anything about farming. My parents don't either. Or it's like go to college and then figure your way
Yeah.
out. And so
Hmm.
luckily I always had that North Star for the arts. And the other thing I
Hmm.
would say is like the early creative influences were my parents had these like abridged, they do the like door to door back in the day. They did the door to door like sales of
Yeah.
encyclopedias and this sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But they
Yeah.
also, yeah, so they had the encyclopedias, but I'm more speaking to they had these like novels, so abridged. So it'd be like Robinson Crusoe or Treasure Island or
Oh,
Count of
wow.
Monte
Yeah.
Cristo and so there were
Uh-huh.
like before I ever had a Nintendo. When I was 11, I got a
We had
Nintendo. Up until I was
encyclopedias and
11, oh, up until 11, I had the library. So until I was 11 and I found Nintendo, I just read
Mhm.
all of those novels. So I think it was my dad's love of horror cinema. And we watched everything, but
Yeah.
um, it was my dad's love of horror cinema plus those novels that I read. And then
Yeah.
the last piece was I'm 43, so I graduated high school in 99. Like there was, I don't know if like for people who remember the late 90s cinema, it was before everything was a blockbuster, right? You got one a summer usually, like 90, like you got like T2, and then you had like, in 91 or 92, and then you have 93, you have Jurassic Park, and you have Twister, and you have Congo, and you had like Men in Black in 97. So you have these like big giant ones, maybe one or two, and then everything else. And so Fight Club, The Matrix, 12 Monkeys, like these amazing pieces of cinema came out around the time that I'm graduating or getting through high school and about to graduate and trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do in my life. So those are the three. It's a
Yeah.
really good question. Again, nobody ever asked, but those were the three pillars of me
Yeah.
deciding to go that way.
That makes a lot of sense though, because as a literary manager, I like a lot of your job has to do with story. So you
Yes.
having that background of like just being immersed in the only entertainment you could, which was Treasure Island and other books like that, which at their core just have amazing stories. Like that makes a lot of sense to me why you would feel passionate in this particular area, because that's at the heart of it. And also Twister is an awesome movie, and Jurassic Park's great too. We
Yeah, they
also
were
love
killer
those.
movies. They're great films.
They're so good.
They're some of my
And
favorites to this day.
appreciate your dad for letting you tag along on those.
I
And
owe him a great debt of gratitude.
yeah, it's very sweet of him. So you have been a literary manager at Circle for almost 14 years. And I
Yeah,
want to talk about how you got there. I know that you said you
yeah,
got an internship right out of college.
yep,
So you've been working there for pretty much the entire time you've been in LA.
yeah,
One of the equally comforting and horrifying things about Hollywood is that there's no path. There's no set path
no,
that everybody
no,
can take. Everybody's
yes,
journey, no matter who you talk to, is incredibly different. So
yes,
I just was wondering if you could sort of lead us down your path from college, what you did in college that sort of led
yeah.
you to getting the internship at Circle, and then how being at Circle evolved into the position that you're at right now.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So, funny enough, I was talking about how blessed I was to be at a management production company and see both sides. Being at the management production company was super helpful. When I was going to Chico State, parents don't have a bunch of money to put me through college or whatever. So I was working full time, and I worked at Target, and I worked in the electronics section. And then there was a good friend of mine, Terry, who worked in the music, movies, and books. She had a niece in LA, and she was like, "You should meet my niece." And I was like, okay. And she goes, yeah, she works kind of in the entertainment.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, she works in entertainment. Like she's in LA. She's the only person I know in LA. So you should meet her.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I go and I meet this woman, and she worked in video games, but like video game voiceover. And and I'm sitting there and I'm asking this questions about becoming a writer, because I hadn't changed courses yet. So I just moved to LA. And she was like, the best piece of advice I could give you is if you can get in at a management production company, that's for the best, because then you'll learn representation, but you'll also learn what it's like to work with the producer. Because she's, at the time I'm telling her I want to be a writer. It was amazing advice. I got fortunate that I got brought into Circle. You got to remember, Circle at the time was pre-Walking Dead, right? Like there's two halves of this company, I think, in the history. Like there's a really pivotal moment when The Walking Dead hits. And we had produced pilots, a couple indie movies, but they hadn't hit the way, I mean, nothing had hit the way The Walking Dead did, right? So from '06 to like 9, 10, when Walking Dead's is starting to happen, it was a much different company. It was smaller. It was like a fourth, maybe less, a fifth of the size that it is now. And it was great because it was so communal. And it's not to say it's not communal now. It's just it's 5 times bigger. So it's
Yeah.
it's different. So you would sit in the bullpen area with the cubicles, and you would hear all day. You would just hear somebody hang up a phone call and be like, "Hey, what do we have that is like this? We need a contained thriller, or we need a rom-com, or whatever." And it was just so immediate. It felt like a movie, honestly, because it was just info going across your face all day, and then we're answering phones all day, sending subs. there was like a real intoxicating sort of energy and emotion to it, because it was just like from 9 to about 6, and then we would work to like 9 to 7:30 really. COVID kind of changed the hours a little bit, but you know, the crazy hours would be like 10 to 6, and then you'd have those extra hours on the beginning and the end where you could take a deep breath and catch up. And so through that process, I'm learning all about, like I said, the management versus the production. And I'm slowly coming to the realization that I don't think I'm supposed to be a writer, because again, I think that's a very particular mindset, and I don't have the full mindset you need. And it was great because I was working with writers, or working for bosses who were working with writers, or, you know, it depended on the situation. And so that was very enlightening, and it gave me a lot of information in a short amount of time. And what I realized about management was, somebody once told me a good manager is half an agent and half a producer. The creative part is what gets me, it would meaning sales and creative. The producer part, the creative part, is what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's not to say that I'm producing a bunch of stuff. I'm not. I think I've gone out with less than 10 things in my entire career that Circle was attached to produce, because I think there's an important balance there, where it should be representation of the client and what's best for them first and foremost, always, not some agenda that you have outside of them. And so sometimes organically, whether it's through representing IP, or whether they think, well, you guys are the company that produced The Walking Dead, your name actually on this specific piece of material would make sense. Great. Very organic. It's nobody's pushing anything on the client. And so, yeah, I told the partners, hey, I think I've decided I want to pursue management. What do I need to do? And they sort of outlined, you know, look, like, meet more agents, meet more CEs, because I'm young, I'm not even promoted yet. So that's the level that I'm going to be meeting, you know, and just get out there, bust your butt, network, and then eventually, you know, start sharing material that you've sourced or developed with clients or potential clients, and share it with us. We'll tell you if we think it's good enough to go into the marketplace, and we'll help you try to sell it if we think it is. And then end of 2010 into the beginning of 2011, we sold a script. That was the first one that I had sold or had been a part of the sales process in a managerial capacity. And then they said, great, that was the last step. We're promoting you. Wow. So I got the promotion. I've been doing it ever since. Taking a step back real quick, because you asked kind of in the beginning. Truth is, when I was in college, the first couple of years, I wanted to pursue sports radio, like play by play, because my whole life I've had this voice, and like, to me, it's normal. It's always been my voice, so I don't hear anything different. But I know other people do, because they ask me all the time, right? A lot of times they're like, "Oh, are you all right? You sick? Are you getting over something or whatever?" And so I remember reading Howard Stern's Private Parts book, because my dad would get free books from working in Tower. We get free books, and I was just reading it one day. I'm not even a big Howard Stern fan. I haven't listened to him in 15 years probably, but he had this book, and I start reading it, and I remember he said, like, everybody always told him he had the worst voice ever for radio, and then so he's always self-conscious about it. And then as he started to blow up finally, after years in the business, he realized that whether it was a good voice or a bad voice, everybody knew it, because everybody else sounded the same. They sounded like Mike Wallace or whatever, right? So he realized that like, that has the perfect voice for broadcasting. And he realized, like, oh, me being different is actually a blessing, not a curse. And so my love of sports plus knowing this voice, I was like, why don't I take these two things that I know really well, or this, you know, I know sports really well, and I have this. And then I started dating my wife, who's my wife now, and I realized that life of working in broadcasting is really hard, and you're moving around constantly. And my wife is from the same plot of land, same 20 acres, her entire life, never left it. She grew up, she's from the farming side of our town. And I realized that, like, that life, if I were single, don't care at all. But for her, if I really wanted to build a life with her, so then I pivoted. I was like, what do I love? I love music, I love movies, I love sports. If I'm checking sports off, and I know the music industry is dying because my dad worked in it, and, you know, big box stores killed the music business, like, in the way, you know, that Napster didn't help, and I mean, and Livewire, Kazaa, all that stuff. but like really big box stores. Because when you went to get your NSYNC album, your Eminem album, or your Dr. Dre or whatever, you could get it for a third of the price at a Tower or at a Target or a Best Buy. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
Tower, to keep the lights on, has to sell it for $17.99. And what sells the most? The top 40 hits sell the most. So Tower
Mm-hmm.
and Best Buy and those companies just like murdered the music industry as we knew it back then. Of course, it's a new thing now, and that's fine. But I realized I didn't want to do music, so I started to get halfway through college on the movie path. Took all the writing courses I could take. Took documentary film courses because they didn't really have traditional film courses at Chico. So I just took all the film or TV related classes I could, and then moved to LA in '06. That was it.
And that's the journey. Wow, that's
That's the journey.
that
Yeah.
no, that's interesting because, I guess in a way a blessing that you pivoted in this way and found something that you're passionate about. And I feel like
Yeah.
that happens to a lot of people, whatever you have your mind focused on is
Yeah.
never what you actually end up doing.
That's right.
You've worked at Circle since 2006, so you've had a lot of time to just watch the company grow, and you've talked about
Yeah.
this from like the beginning stages when you started working there towards when you got promoted. What
Yep.
was, I guess, the most surprising thing for you about being in management and production that you didn't realize before?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions, I'm gonna be honest, because there's a lot. Honestly, there's
Yeah.
a ton that you don't anticipate, right? Like, I'll give you an example, just a quick anecdote. I won't name names or anything, but early in my career, go to negotiate a deal, right? And like the lawyer's on the call, the agent's on the call, you're on the call, and usually, the manager is usually one of the quieter voices on the call. So, because I'm learning, right? I'm learning the game from the lawyers and the agents who do this every day, and they're legally allowed to procure work in the state of California. There's like legalese involved in it. But of
Mhm.
course, we can have input, whatever. So I'm on the call, and like the client had asked us to be aggressive because he didn't care if the deal made or not. Like, he was in a
Mhm.
position where he knew the deal wasn't going to be great. So he was like,
Mhm.
be as aggressive as you can because if we have to walk away from this deal, I don't mind. So great.
Mhm.
He gave us the info, gave us the power. Let's go to work. To get on the call, and it becomes evident very quickly that the agent and the lawyer aren't being aggressive. And it put me in this weird position. Like, they're kind of just like, okay, so you don't want to give on that. Okay, you don't want to give on that. Okay. And they're just sort of accepting that it's going to be a bad deal, and not really fighting to see where the, how
Yeah.
far it can go, and try to mitigate how bad of a deal it is. And so I had this like moment of like, oh, I guess I have to do this. And so then it's just you just have this moment where you're like, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I guess I'll do it and dive
Yeah.
in. So I
Wow.
dove in and just was like, no, 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 we want this, we want that. You got to give them something, and
Mhm.
the deal was still a bad deal at the end of the day, but it was that I think I had this crisis of conscience of like, my job is to represent this writer to the best way I know how. And
Mhm.
they gave me very sort of clear instructions. And if I don't follow those instructions, I'll feel guilty. Honestly, I'll feel
Mhm.
guilty, like knowing that we didn't
Mhm.
do as good as we could have done. And
Mhm.
so sometimes, like, that's a thing I've noticed. Like, some agents are very aggressive, some lawyers are very aggressive, but sometimes they don't want to ruin a relationship with the business affairs exec. So they're maybe less aggressive than they could be on behalf of the client. And I'm not saying I've never been caught in that position. I'm not above it, but I always try to like use my North Star as like, what, like if the client were here, what would they want me to do? And I try. I'm not saying I'm batting 1,000. I'm just saying that it was like a real moment of clarity for me of
Yeah.
like just how I should approach everything. I think one of the things that surprised me more than anything is how much I have to remind, like executives, like development executives, whether it be at the studio level or producer level, how much I have to remind them that like just because a writer sits in front of a computer from 9 to 5 doesn't mean it's the same as if you and I go clean up the highway from 9 to 5. Like there's real discernible progress.
Mm-hmm.
There's tangible progress. The highway looks really clean for these 200 yards or whatever. That for a writer, it's like creative energy is not the same as just sitting in front of something and just typing away. And I think I spend a lot of time reminding executives of this fact because, of course, look, there's contractual obligations if you get hired to do something. You're supposed to turn the script around in this amount of time. It says 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is. And if they're not, I try to get ahead of these things and say, okay, is the client maybe too distracted, too many things going on? How do we pare it down? Like there's things I can do to help progress it. But at the end of the day, sometimes a very desirable client, desirable insofar as a bunch of producers or studios want to work with them, has more than one job. And so preaching patience is very tough, right? Everything in this industry, people are always like complaining, oh, everything takes forever. And they're not wrong. A lot of things take way longer than they need to. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's because there's multiple reasons, but sometimes it's because the client they're doing 2 other jobs that came before you and you just have to wait. You just have to be patient. So yeah, it's a lot of like, that's always surprised me, that the lack of sort of acknowledgement that this is a creative business and creative energy is not the same as physical energy. It's a very different, it's a mental thing, not a physical thing. And so just, yeah, well, what are they doing? Are they not sitting in their coffee shop all day? And you're like, yeah, but that doesn't mean what's coming out is ready to go to you,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's stuff like that. Those are just a couple examples. I mean, I have 100, but it's like, those are some of the ones that have always surprised me. Oh, and the third one, just because I know writers are going to, aspiring writers are going to hear this, listen to, like, ask questions from the lawyers, agents, and managers. So many writers don't give a shit about the legal aspect of their deals because they're creative, and that's completely reasonable and understandable. But if I could give one piece of advice to an up and coming writer, and I've started to do this with my own clients, I'd be like, go sit down with your lawyer for half hour, go through your contract, and every item that you don't understand, ask them. Because I can give you a definition, but it's going to be way better coming from them. But I think they get very intimidated because they don't speak that language. So they get very shy. Like, I can tell they don't understand something that we're negotiating for, and they don't ask. And no, this person represents you, you pay them, you should be able to ask anything. That's the way I see it.
That makes a lot of sense. And those anecdotes, thank you for sharing those. They're
Yeah.
very insightful and also fun.
Yeah, I mean, I have thousands of them. I could do it all day. I don't want to bore everybody
Yeah,
to
to be
tears.
a 24-hour stream with that.
Yeah.
Hearing you talk about that is very interesting because sort of what I'm gathering is that a literary agent is sort of between these two worlds, between like the creative side and the business side. And you're sort of
Yeah.
like,
Managers. Yeah.
yeah, translating things for the creatives and then translating the creative
Yep.
spiel into business, which is that's like requires so many parts of your brain. So
You said
and
it
so
really well. Thank you. I'm going to steal that. You said it so succinctly. it's
it's
going into
okay.
my vocabulary now.
All right, I give you permission.
Thank you.
You touched on this, and I'm curious if you could maybe speak more about the relationship between you and your clients, and then also you and producers and executives. How do you typically interact with producers and
Mhm.
executives, and what sort of like relationships do you guys have?
So, 3 pieces of advice I give to anybody who's trying to get into this business. I don't care what capacity. You want to be an agent, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a manager, you want to whatever. There's 3 things I say. I say, trust your taste. Whatever you love is what you love. Don't chase trends. You'll always be behind the trend.
Mm-hmm.
Don't. What you like is what you like. And if you'll find somebody else who likes that thing, right? You're never going to bat 1,000. You're not going to go out with a spec or script or have everybody read it and every single person's going to be like, it's the best thing I ever read. It's not going to happen, nor should it, because it's not, it's subjective. It's art. Art is subjective. You should embrace that you're going to hear no a lot, and it makes the yeses worth it. It's invigorating. It's like intoxicating when you get a yes after you got 100 no's. It's amazing. And that's what Hollywood is in a nutshell, because it's art. The other thing is, don't quit. Just don't quit. I know it sounds so reductive and so simple and so plain and trite, but it's not. Don't quit. This industry is going through a contracted period or period of contraction. Let me say it that way. Right now, right? TV's gone from 460 shows to 270 shows in a couple years. Like, but that's I know that's scary, but it's always been hard. So it's just degrees of hard, right? So don't quit. And then the third piece, which is leading to answering your question directly, is network your ass off. You have to meet everyone. I always ask young people when I'm very like open door policy at work. So whether you're an assistant or an intern, you have questions, you can come into me anytime if I'm not on the phone or in a meeting. And so the one thing I always say to them when they're talking about, I'm at this crossroads, I don't know if I want to do this, I don't want to do that. And there kind of is no wrong answer. You said this earlier, like everybody's path in Hollywood is different. So the one thing I try to do is get rid of the FOMO. And the second thing I try to do is say, okay, let's game out a scenario. You have the best screenplay ever. You wrote it, you want to produce it, whatever it is, right? Just in your mind, this is the greatest fucking thing since sliced bread. Great.
Yeah.
What do you do with it? What do you do with it? And they'll look at me and they'll be like, well, I can send it to you. And I'm like, great. Then what if I don't like it? And they're just kind of stumped, right? They might have two or three other people, but eventually it's a very small answer for them. And then they go like, and I go, exactly. That's why you have to meet everybody. You should have, well, I'm going to call these 20 producers and I'm going to call these agents because I want to try to package it with talent or directors or these pods that are run by directors or talent. Like there's a million different ways to skin a cat in this business. And if you don't start figuring out what those answers are, it's very hard to be successful in any capacity. And again, I tell writers this because a lot of times writers are like, well, you're my representation. Maybe they have an agent. You're my representation, lawyer. So you guys are always working for me. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't mean you don't work for yourself. So many great things have happened in this business through personal relationships, right? So you were in a writers group 15 years ago and, one of the people in there became a showrunner. So you just hit them up one day, like, how's things? Let's catch up. Let's grab a bite or let's grab a coffee, whatever. And then it ends up, becoming business. You figure out a way to do something with them. That's Hollywood to me. To me, it's collaborative and you got to be really creative, not only like creative in storytelling, but like creative in the ways you think about putting a project together. That's the business part, right?
Yeah.
You can give notes until you're blue in the face. That's the development part that I love. And I love that way more than I love the other stuff. But it's my job to be able to think through how do we get this set up and then execute how do I get this set up. And so that's just part of the job of being a manager. But yeah, I mean, network. I mean, it's the biggest thing you could do for yourself.
One more time for those in the back. Network
All day. Things like this, right? Pitch festivals, mixers. Like I'm going to be at Holly Shorts this weekend and meeting with friends who I've known for over a decade because I like them and I love the festival and I'm a huge supporter of it. And that even though it's fun, it's still networking, right? One doesn't have to preclude the other. It doesn't have to be painful.
That's true. That's something that I think a lot of people forget in networking because especially I feel like with younger people, everyone's very anxious and you don't want to approach people in a way where it's like, please give me a job, this sort of like begging mentality or desperate. So remembering that you're just talking with people and people are fun and people are nice. And even if nothing comes of it, like meeting people in general in life is, I would say, largely a benefit. So
100% agree with you.
Yeah, no, that's very good advice. Network, network, network. We'll write
all
that down.
day.
Put it on a t-shirt.
Because you just don't know, right? Like you don't know who the next,
Hmm.
big deal producer, writer, director. You have no idea. And the people that you actually share something in common with, and on a deeper level, and then you share similar tastes, like those people may become your friends, but like close friends. But you don't have to force that. You just be a human. Just
Hmm.
find out what they like. Share your story. Don't feel like you have to be like, oh, you like that? I like that too. No, you don't have to do all that.
Hmm.
You can just be
Hmm.
you.
So true. And I have to confess, I hate Treasure Island. Now that we're
Oh,
talking,
no,
I'm just kidding.
you're
I'm
all
just kidding.
good. No, hardly my favorite. You know what I learned most from those books was that I love Mark Twain. Like Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's
That's
Court
true.
is one of my favorite. I learned I like Mark Twain. I'm not a big Treasure Island guy either. So don't
I'm
feel
just
bad.
kidding.
I'm
I'm
not.
just
No, yeah. Robinson Crusoe I liked a lot more.
Well, that was great advice for all the people listening who are maybe have some anxiety around networking. On another technical level, in terms of your work, you have clients who are creatives, writers, directors. What
Yep.
sorts of criteria are you referencing in your head when you're thinking about taking on a new client? What sorts of
Yep.
boxes are you looking to check, or like green flags to look for?
The first thing is voice. It's just on the page where it's not. I always give this analogy because I'm a sports nerd. It's like Michael Jordan was 6'6", 210, 205, something like that, and became
Uh-huh.
the greatest player of all time. There were a lot of other players in the NBA who were 6'6" and incredibly athletic, right? Dominique Wilkins, to me, just as an athlete, is
Hmm.
more explosive, can jump just as high, if not higher, stronger, crazy freak of nature athlete. Like just the combination of speed and ability to jump and strength was just off the charts. Russell Westbrook is an insane athlete, but Michael Jordan's the GOAT, right? So I think you can be born with these gifts, and I think
Hmm.
you're born with a gift of storytelling on a certain level, and then you work really hard to hone that gift. But if everybody could just go to USC, get a screenwriting degree, and then be multimillionaire screenwriter, I would be doing that. I wouldn't be in representation. Like,
Yeah.
why would I be on the other end,
Hmm.
living vicariously through these amazing artists? It's
Hmm.
because they're amazing artists and I'm
Hmm.
not. It doesn't mean I don't have an artistic side. It doesn't mean I have no artistic talent. It's that they're not binary. It just means I'm not them. And I'm
Hmm.
great with that. I came to terms with that in like 2008. Like I'm all good with that.
Yeah.
But that's something that I think you have to accept. So that voice on the page, it can be honed, it can be crafted, it can be worked on extensively, and then of course put into a structure that helps make the voice shine. But at the end of the day, there's going to be this inherent, like Michael Jordan was going to be 6'6" because of genetics. You're
Hmm.
going to be a good storyteller because of something innate. And I'm not saying it's nature or nurture. I'm sure it's a combination of both, but you just have an ability to take something that is would be boring if you told it exactly as it is. So you embellish it just enough that it still seems very real, but not
Hmm.
impossible. Like that's such a sweet spot that I don't think you can really teach that. So
Hmm.
I look for voice. And then once I read the voice on the page, I don't care if it's one sample, 10 samples, like to
Hmm.
me, the voice is there. And I can either
Hmm.
take that voice in success, hopefully together we'll do it, and find the most commercial version of your voice. And that's not
Hmm.
to say that every client should be writing Marvel movies. No, quite the opposite. Every
Hmm.
client has a different bar to reach for what constitutes commercial.
Hmm.
And it's us finding that through developing together if they're a younger client. A more established client who's maybe had representation before or sold things before, they're usually more in tune with what they do well and they just own it. So they don't need as much development. And that's either way, I don't mind. It's just I
Hmm.
either love the voice or I don't. And then the
Yeah.
second piece is personality. This is a person to person business. You can be in a coffee shop writing while you're on writing periods or you're writing a spec or you're being commissioned to write something.
Hmm.
But eventually you're in a room with a
Hmm.
studio. or a financier or a producer or a director or an actor, actress. So it is a very communal business. And then in TV, you're talking about writers' rooms. You're sitting there with, you know, half a dozen other writers, more give or take, and
Mm-hmm.
you're collaborating and throwing things against the whiteboard to see what sticks. People are saying, "Oh, that I didn't love that idea, but that idea sparked this other idea," and you sort of have to learn to
Mm-hmm.
interact with other people and have thick skin.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
those are the two, to me, those are the two requirements. If I see the voice and I love it, even if it's not refined yet, and
Mm-hmm.
then meet the person and I get along with them on a personal level, then
Mm-hmm.
we have a conversation about representation. But if you can't check those two boxes, there's nothing I can do for you, because no, I say this all the time. It's one of my catchphrases, but no script has ever sold because the format was perfect, right? No script has ever sold because they were like, oh my God, the way they nailed the call to action, and then the first act and the second act midpoint
Oh,
twist,
their
like,
punctuation was so
oh, the
consistent.
punctuation, oh, the red herring was the best red herring ever. No, I mean, you might have that as part of a bigger piece of art that's great,
Yeah.
but nobody's ever sold something because they nailed
Yeah.
every beat of Save the Cat. It's never
Yeah.
happened.
Oh, did you see
Never
that
will.
Daniel? Oh my God. That's not
That's what I'm saying. Like, no, it's like,
happening.
nah, nobody, it's not that those things don't add to a greater
Mm-hmm.
whole at the end of the day. It's just that that's not why anybody has ever bought or optioned a spec.
Mm-hmm.
Never. Because
Yeah.
you read Save the Cat and you nailed it. No, read
Mm-hmm.
Save the Cat.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone should read that book. And then like kind of put it in the back of your mind and then just be an artist. Like
Yeah.
throw it away. Not throw it
Yeah.
away literally, but it's sort of, I think there's a lot of it is innate, like
Mm-hmm.
at least culturally in Western storytelling, right? Like I went to the store and I got in an argument with this person, and then the cashier came to break it up, and then we squashed our beef, and I left with my grocery. Like that's a terrible, boring story. But it's innate. There's a character who's put in a position of conflict, and then there's a resolution, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, yes, I 100% believe you should read every screenwriting book. I think Save the Cat is great. And then again, I think you should throw it out. Not because it's bad, but because you need to be an artist. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that because I want everybody to spend the money on Save the Cat and then put it on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
But that's it. Read it, put it on a shelf.
Yeah. We've all got coffee tables that need to be filled with
Yes.
something. So,
Otherwise, you get rigid. Otherwise, you get rigid, and that's the thing. Like, I feel like the writer of Save the Cat one day is gonna find me and beat the shit out of me. Like, it's not that. It's that it's rigid, right? Like, people take screenwriting classes and then they think, okay, well, if I do all these things,
mm-hmm.
now I'm a screenwriter. No,
Mm-hmm.
you wrote a screenplay. That does not make you an artist. Two very
That's
different
true.
things.
Yeah. That's
That's
very
all I'm
true.
saying.
My professor, she was in a writer's room, and she once gave me this great advice that the best writers in writers' rooms just are the people that you can withstand being in a room with for 10 hours. Because by the eighth hour,
True.
everybody's kind of over each other, and it's the people that are able to maintain like
Yeah.
positive attitudes, good relationships, be generally likable for long amounts of time. It's those
Right.
people that stand out. So I
And that's
that
hard.
it's so
Every
hard.
day, 5 days a week for a minimum. Usually the minimum is 20 weeks.
Yeah.
And if it's broadcast, shit. If it's a broadcast show that gets 22 episodes, that could be 40 plus weeks
Mm-hmm.
of your year. So yeah, it's what you said, right? We've all been in jobs where we have coworkers, and some you love and some you don't. And you
Mm-hmm.
got to keep that brave face, because otherwise you're going to get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Mm-hmm.
great piece of advice your professor gave you, because it's true. You sit with these people all day, every day, and remember, it's not just that you're sitting with them, but you might throw an idea out there that somebody shits all over it, and then it
Absolutely.
becomes something else, and you just have to kind of
Yeah.
learn to have that thick skin. That usually when somebody's dismissing your idea in a writer's room, it's usually, sometimes there's politics, but like usually it's because there actually is a better or a more clever solution. And you just
Mm-hmm.
have to be like, okay, well, my idea sparked the better idea, and that has to be enough of a win
Yeah,
versus everything
exactly.
I said is gold and it's on the TV
Hmm.
now. Like if you have that mentality, day one you're gonna break. Day
Hmm.
one, you will hate that career.
Right? It's important, I think, to keep in mind the story over any individual contributions you may have. Like, as long as it ends up being good, however little or much of your specific individual input was part of it, that it doesn't matter, you know?
That's right. That's right. You're part of the process.
I remember there was this interview, I think, with Bill Hader, and he said something that touched on a similar theme of when people give you a note. He said, when people give you a note, their attempt to fix it is usually wrong, but addressing the problem is
Yeah.
correct. So
Yeah.
it's another way of balancing, getting notes and realizing, okay, I'm gonna internalize what needs to be fixed here, but not exactly the way that maybe other people suggest to do it. Because then it's not
We
you.
say we say the note behind the note, right? Like
Yes,
that's the old Hollywood
super
adage.
important.
Like when you hear a note as a writer and you're like, I don't know what this person's talking about, usually there's some kernel of truth in there
Hmm.
and you kind of have to sift through it.
Hmm.
That's a real thing that every writer and rep deals with. Even sometimes it's you and the writer, like you as the manager giving your notes before producers or studios or get involved,
Hmm.
financiers, and you have to really unpack. You have to really
Hmm.
unpack it. Yeah.
This goes along with sort of like clients, and we've talked about what stands out in clients and in scripts. Another element of that is pitching, and I know that pitching is something that uh, you know the cliche writers of please don't look at me like I don't want to speak at all. I think a lot of people fall into that. So for
Yeah.
you, what makes a good pitch?
There's a couple things. So obviously you don't want to just read off of, don't just have your paper where you're just like reading,
Hmm.
don't do that.
And then yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's the same kind of advice you would get in like speech and debate back in college or high
Hmm.
school, right? Like don't be it can't sound rote. It has to be an emotion. So you have to inflect. The best pitches have the tone of the piece is implied through the delivery. So like
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. Amazing client I work with who was pitching us a TV show. And the TV show has a sort of desperate housewivesy tone to it.
Hmm.
So as she was pitching it, she would like pretend like I'm going to let you in on a little secret about this character, et
Hmm.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It implied the tone of the show,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So she's getting all the information across that you would in a pitch. Who are the characters? What's the world? Who's the market for this? Why are you excited about this idea? Why now? Right? They say why you, why now, and for who is this show existing? Right? And then you get
Hmm.
into the specific creative, like
Hmm.
here's what happens throughout season one, and blah blah blah. That's to me is like really key if you can do that. Not everybody can do that, and I don't expect everybody to be that performative.
Hmm.
I had mentors who are since retired that were agents that I love dearly to this day. I try to keep in touch. They used to send some writers to improv classes,
Mm.
just so that if somebody broke their rhythm, because a lot of people they say what that the fear of public speaking is more prevalent than the fear of death. I remember
Hmm.
in speech and debate they told us that. I have no idea if those
I
figures
believe
are correct, but I heard that in like 3 or 4 different classes uh, coming up, and so whether that's true or not, I do know a lot
Yeah.
of people who are very fearful of public speaking.
Hmm.
So fair, and that's I think letting a little bit of your personality in, and then you have to be able. You can't be so even if you're not reading it, but you've memorized it to a T. You have to be willing to dance a little bit. Like they're gonna throw some shit at you, and you're gonna be like, okay, I got to pivot.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
didn't respond the way I thought they were going to respond to
Yeah,
that, so maybe I can pivot here. Or
yeah.
they're going to ask you a question in the middle of your pitch, and you're going to be like, oh shit, They threw me off my game. You can't let that happen. And so I think that that was what the improv class was for, as much as the performance concept. I think it was as much about being willing to like, oh, I gotta dance on my feet a little bit. Okay, I gotta pivot.
Yeah.
They threw me off. You gotta be well. You're gonna get thrown off all the time, so you gotta be
Yeah.
able to do the
Yeah.
thing.
No, that's great advice. I as someone who does get a little bit nervous sometimes,
Totally.
doing that, hearing, improv and staying on your feet. That's a very like tactile piece of advice that I think is good for
It's
people to
worked in the
hear.
past. I've seen it work.
So it must be true. And I wonder if that's true. Fear of public speaking is more prevalent than death.
I was told this truly in multiple classes because I took
That is
various
either
speech
a true
classes.
fact or the greatest gaslight that has ever happened.
Correct.
Who
I
knows?
have no idea. No
I
idea. But
agree.
I do know that I've seen people, in class like almost pass out and stuff. Like I know that it's
Yeah.
certainly
Yeah.
a terrifying thing. I completely understand that.
Okay, well, we're almost at the end of our time. I want to end it with two questions. One, first of all, thank you so much for
Of
joining
course,
us
it's my
today.
pleasure. Truly a
This has
pleasure.
been very helpful.
Good.
I know we've talked about so much advice, and you've given
Mhm.
so many pieces of advice to young writers. So I guess the way I'll frame this is, if you were to give advice to your younger self who just graduated college, is out in the world, has no idea what they want to do, is super passionate about a lot of different
Yeah.
things, but is maybe nervous a little bit about being an adult and having a career and making choices,
Yeah.
what advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would definitely say don't quit, network your ass off, and trust your taste. I do truly live by that and impart that on other people. But I
Mhm.
think a little more, since we already touched on that stuff, I think a little to get into the weeds a little bit more and a little more specific, I would say I would like tell myself you belong. I think I spent a lot of time early in my career worried about the imposter syndrome thing, right? And feeling like I went to Chico State and like I have colleagues who went to NYU and Harvard and Stanford and like, fancy schools all over this country and grad schools and they got law degrees and a couple of them passed the bar, like that was really intimidating early in my career. I'm like, I don't come from much. I went to a tiny state school, like how am I going to make it? And I think I just made it through being myself and trusting my taste, not quitting and just putting it all out there, meeting everybody, finding ways to to sort of relate to somebody, even though they are from a very different background. My wife and I talk about this all the time. And like, I've had family members call me and be like, I don't know how you did it. Like you made it. Like, and
Yeah.
I don't feel like I made it. Let me be clear. Like I feel like I have so much
Uh-huh.
more to give and so much more to offer and accomplish in my career. But I think that that imposter syndrome really, really slowed me down early in my career because I was so scared of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And I'll give this one last thing because I learned this from a mentor of mine who's still a very good friend of mine, and I love him dearly. Early in my career, I went to a lunch with him. I don't even remember what the context was because I was an assistant, but sitting there at lunch, and new relationship, you don't really have much to talk about yet because you don't know the person, you know where they're from,
Yeah.
and most people that's the same questions when you're from. Where you from? How'd you get here? Where'd you go to
Yeah.
school? And then
Where are you
which is
calling
fine. Like,
from?
yeah, where? Yeah, first time, long time, or long time
Yeah.
listener, first time caller. Where are you from?
Yeah.
And but it makes sense because then you see if you have something in common there that you can latch on to. Fine,
Mhm.
fine, fine. He had the best icebreaker question. I've said this in interviews before, and I swear by this icebreaker. He said to this person, what's a movie you love that everybody hates? What's a movie you hate that everybody loves? Just an amazing question. Just an
Yeah.
amazing, like such a fun, you could do that to somebody at a dinner party who has nothing to do with the industry and it's fun. It's
Yeah.
just fun. But what it does is it disarms the person on a level where they feel like they can be themselves. You don't feel like you have to be that person in the industry. And we've all been this person at some point in time in our career where somebody's raving about something they love, and you're like, yeah. And in the back of your head, you're like, I couldn't stand that show or that movie, right? We've all done
Yeah,
it. We've all done it because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, and they're
yeah.
clearly passionate. Maybe they were involved in it, and you definitely don't want to hurt their feelings. But that icebreaker question is a perfect encapsulation of how to endear somebody to you, because
Mhm,
now they know you're on the level and there's like a permission to speak freely, and
mhm,
you can just be you, and you don't have to feel like, oh, I love that Oscar movie that I actually hated.
mhm,
It's great. It's great. It's really
mhm.
great. And so it's stuff like that that I would more specifically tell myself.
Wow, I'm stealing that question.
Oh, it's amazing. I hope everybody
Great
uses it. It's
question.
such a good conversation starter. So
It's so
good.
good. And now I'm in my head thinking about like, what would I say? What are the movies that it's
What are the
perfect.
movies? That's what I'm saying.
I love that. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Zach, for joining us. This has been so fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.